Okay, we are live, everybody. How is everyone doing today on this Monday afternoon,
Dandy.
morning, evening, wherever you are in the world? We are happy. We are very, very honored, very happy, very excited to be joined by two of the absolute best in the business and two fantastic people. We are honored to have Andrei Martyanov and Larry Johnson with us on this live stream. Andrei, where can people find you real quick?
Uh, it's my blog primarily, which is called Reminiscence of the Future, which is also the address is smoothiex12 at blogspot.com. And that's pretty much my main resource. So I'm primarily there. I write there.
I will put a link for that in the description box down below, and I will put a link for these sites, these blogs, and these channels as a pinned comment when the live stream is over. Mr. Larry Johnson, where can people find you?
Sonar21.com, SONAR21.com. Real simple. Like me.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So let's just do a quick hello. Let's say a quick hello to everybody watching us on Odyssey, on Rumble, on YouTube chat, and on Locals chat, the Duran.locals.com. Great community there on Locals. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the chat. Thank you to our moderators as well, real quick. I saw Zarael in the house, the one and only Zarael. Thank you for moderating. Alice in Blunderland, thank you for moderating as well. Who else is moderating real quick to say a quick hello? I think it's you two and me. I will also be helping out in the moderation. So we'll have more moderators joining us as well. And all the messages and super chats, I will be scrolling them on the bottom of the screen. We will answer those questions in a dedicated video. After this stream, we will be going on for about an hour and a half today. The Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris, love the Good Day shirt. I pass it off to you. So let's get this stream moving. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Alex, and it's great to be here on this program. And can I just say it's absolutely wonderful to be speaking again to Larry and to Andrei, two of the best commentators by far on Ukraine. If you really want to get sense about what's going on in Ukraine, not just Ukraine, by the way, but generally in the world, you can't do much better than go to their respective blogs. And can I just say, Andrei has written wonderfully about changes in military affairs. And if you also want to understand American politics and what really is going on in American politics, which is, I find, infinitely depressing as somebody who has feelings about the US. Yeah. Larry, again, is very much the person to go to. But I think today we're going to talk about the inflection point, which is the topic of this program. And I think this is the inflection point. Now, can I just say to these two wonderful gentlemen that there's been a major mood shift here in London. I don't know about the government so much and the political leadership, but the media, they're not talking about it very much. You won't actually find what I'm going to say in the articles, but I know it's true. They've suddenly sensed, finally, conclusively, that this war is being lost. And one of the reasons for this, the key thing that they were promised, and it's important to say they were promised this August, was this offensive in Kherson region. I mean, a lot of them really believed it was going to come. There's been article after article here in London pounding away at this story about the Kherson counteroffensive. I remember, reading about how it was coming all the way back in March. May surprise you. It went, goes back that far. I remember when Lysychansk was lost to Ukraine. I remember reading articles saying this is of no strategic significance at all, because even as Russia's advancing in Donbass, this great counteroffensive is about to be launched in Kherson. And suddenly, over the last week or so, in fact, the penny has finally dropped. A penny which, of course, both you gentlemen were fairly well aware of. There isn't going to be a Kherson counteroffensive. And it's difficult, I think, to convey how much anger and shock there has been about this amongst the political journalist pundit class here, and how much sense of anger and betrayal there has been. So there's been a mood shift in Britain. We're having terrible economic news. We're now predicted to have 18.6% inflation here in January. Nobody in London has any idea what to do about this. And for the first time, they understand that they're actually losing the war in Ukraine. But of course, that's Britain. And, you know, we're only a tiny player in this conflict, even though we imagine otherwise. But I think that probably in Ukraine, maybe the United States also, they're starting to sense the shift. And I've noticed articles now appearing in places like the National Interest saying how the United States is the strategic loser in this war. And also, I think there's a genuine sense to that Ukraine is now resorting to theatrics, strikes in Crimea with minor drones. I'm sorry to say this, but horrible murder attacks in Moscow, though we don't have the whole story, and maybe we should be careful what we say about that. But all those kind of things to hide the fact, conceal the fact that it's losing the war and is going to go on losing it. And if Ukraine is defeated, be very clear, here in Europe, Britain is still geographically part of Europe. There will be major geopolitical consequences. It will be seen here as a major geopolitical defeat for the United States on the scale of Vietnam, and perhaps even greater than that. So that's what I wanted to say. They're just throwing out some thoughts there, and maybe you gentlemen can take it further.
Larry, will you?
All right, I'll jump in. Perhaps this is going to be the start of a second annual anniversary for the United States. Last year we bailed out in Afghanistan, and that was quite a horror show. And maybe this year the next candidate is Ukraine. It is remarkable how much of the media still in America can persist in trying to tell a story that is just complete fantasy. And you've got Andrei put up an article, I think yesterday, about this Yale professor, where they're doing an analysis of what's going on, claiming that the Russian economy is collapsing and the shelves are bare. And then, it didn't. I don't think Andrei took you maybe 3 minutes to find that piece on YouTube where here's this Australian strolling around Moscow showing just unbelievable amounts of food and goods that people can purchase. So, it's a lie, but they somehow keep pushing that lie to engender hatred towards Russia. I ran into it with this other fellow, Peter, what was his name? Jacob Fagan or Fraden. And and he told this. He wrote this article about, Russia's just, getting beat silly. And this guy was born in Russia, went to school in Russia, but really, and said he's been back within the last 30 years. But when I wrote about him, I said, did they have a bag the entire time he was there? Did they lock him up in his hotel room? Because he talked about Russia, for example, technologically 50 years behind the West. Now, I'm not great at math. I can, add and subtract, but I could figure out the fact that the United States had to rely upon the Russian Soyuz rocket to take our astronauts to outer space. That would seem to me that Russia had maybe, let's call it, a slight advantage. Russia has developed hypersonic missiles that are hitting de facto NATO bases in Western Ukraine. United States doesn't have that. I guess, call me crazy, another slight edge for Russia on the technological side. So when you start adding all of this up, the only thing America has succeeded in, or what the United States, the politicians in Washington, is deceiving the people of America. That is propaganda, CIA, Black Ops, covert action program has accomplished. They have confused and made the people of the United States more ignorant. Has not changed a single thing on the ground. In fact, it's probably emboldened the Russians.
Yeah, Larry is absolutely correct. I mean, it has no relevance or relation to. Somebody has to moderate my chair. Do we have moderator for my chair? And call WD-40. No, the point is, Larry is absolutely correct. It's all narrative. And about this Kherson counteroffensive, and I've been writing this nonstop for several months now. And when you look even at the geography of the theater of operations, which is primarily eastern Ukraine or central Ukraine, to the south, closer to the Black Sea, you will see immediately that it's primarily steppes, and what is called lesa, which is forest steppes, a lot of open spaces, not everywhere. To go to the north around Kharkov, you get some significant forests there. But the point is, even if Ukraine would have had the force, which she doesn't, to mount some kind of, tactical level, attack, especially if they try to attack Kherson, which they were claiming for 2 months now, there's a 56 kilometers of empty space between Nikolaev and Kherson. And anybody who ever saw the scheme of their deployment from the march to the combat order of anything of the size of brigade, they will understand that it will take about 3 hours to do so, which is more than enough to receive targeting by even without, for the third-rate country, let alone Russia with her space and other intelligence assets, and that will be it pretty much. It will be burned to the ground, and you will have the repetition of the situation which you had pretty much all over the place. And yes, because of that, and because of the more and more they're leaking those numbers, despite the fact this clown Zaluzhny, who for some reason passes for great military mind in Ukraine, confirmed today that, well, we have high losses. The reality is, when you look at the losses of VSU, or Armed Forces of Ukraine, VSU as organized military force doesn't exist anymore. It is primarily hodgepodge units which are collected or assembled in the rear and thrown on the front. And I call it the Volkssturm 1945 reality for Ukraine, if anybody wants to see any historical analogies. And that's what we have right now.
Yeah. I was hearing, I was in contact with a friend who's still, let's call him on active duty within the intelligence community last Thursday. And he says, we are seeing signs that something's going to happen, that the Ukrainians genuinely believe they can take back Crimea. And it was like, what? And so as we dug in and we talked about it, and this is what, in one of my blog postings, I posted a scene from the second season of the HBO series The Wire, which tells about drug trafficking in Baltimore. And in this, one of these characters, a small, skinny guy, is convinced by all of his fellow dock workers that he can actually beat up this mountain of a man. And they encourage him and say, oh, yeah, you got him, go get him. Well, it turns out, and the reason I put that up, that is exactly what the United States and Europe is doing to Ukraine right now. They are, in fact, lying to them about, oh, guys, you got them on the ropes. Man, the Russians, they're really hurting here. Just keep pushing and you're going to fall over. I mean, it's inhumane. It's unethical. It's immoral. Pick your phrase. But this is what the West is now doing to the Ukraine, and the carnage that has been unleashed on Ukrainian troops is it's horrific. I mean, we have not seen these kinds of losses troops since World War II. And I know that every one of the bodies comes with a mother or a father or a sister, some family relative. So this is going to leave a very deep emotional scar upon the people of Ukraine.
Larry, you mentioned the losses. What do you make of the announcement from, I believe, Zaluzhny, who said that 9,000 Ukrainians have been killed in this war?
I think Zelensky is giving him access to his cocaine stash. I mean, really, I mean, this is, these are adults. I can understand children lying and exaggerating and, believing in unicorns or Santa Claus or, whatever mythical figure you want to prop up. But he's a grown adult man. And if you can't start admitting to yourself what's transpiring, and this is why, early on I had written, in March, that I thought the war was over, because once Russia eliminated the ability of the Ukrainian Air Force to operate, so that you no longer had any ability to provide close air support or aerial attacks upon Russian positions. Once you eliminated the rotary wing force, so that they could not attack columns of tanks that are moving along, but then what's left? Air power is a critical element for a ground force to advance. And at the same time, Russia's demonstrated that its air defense system is superior, not only to what Ukraine has, to anything that NATO has. And every single drone and most of those drone attacks are being, shot out of the sky. So when you put all that together, and look back in history, as Andrei was pointing out, in World War II, the Soviets suffered enormous losses early on, but they had camps and training facilities back behind the Ural Mountains where troops could be brought and trained and then deployed to the front. But that took time. Look at the time between the start of Operation Barbarossa and then when Stalingrad occurred and the launch of the counteroffensive by the Soviets then. Was that 18 months? So it takes time. You don't see that on Ukraine. You're not seeing Ukraine, gathering a good, large group of forces to its side. Mm-hmm. And, they're sending a few to the UK for training, but, it's just they're equipping them for new cannon fodder when they go back. So when you put all this together, you've got a picture of a country that really, if this was a boxing match, you'd force a stop to it because the opponent's just getting beaten to a bloody pulp.
Mm-hmm. Alexander, you're back with us. We lost you for a sec. There's a lot of people curious, Alexander, Andrei, Larry, about where do we go from here after this incident with Daria Dugina. Anyway, Alexander, good to have you back.
Leonie, thank you. Well, I'm going to make a guess about this. I think that the Daria Dugina episode is going to harden feelings in Russia, but I don't think it's going to change the conduct of the war. I think that I was in Moscow during a major terrorist offensive against Moscow. This was at the time during the Second Chechen War, when there was the episode at Beslan. I was actually in Russia at the time when that happened. I remember seeing metro attacks and explosions and terrorist incidents taking place on a huge scale. And the thing that really struck me is how toughly this society responded to this. Now, I can make direct comparisons because, of course, I lived in London at the time of the IRA campaign against London in the 1970s. I was at school in London at that time, and of course, sometime there was also an incident. Terrorist incidents in London when Islamist terrorists were putting bombs in metro stations. And, we did respond with some tenacity then, but it was not comparable to what I saw in Moscow. In Moscow, there was not just a sense that we're not going to be intimidated by this, but we're not going to be influenced by it either. And I remember being hugely impressed at how rapidly, for example, the metro system went back into operation after the metro attacks there. So I think this is going to harden resolve. It's going to make people in Russia say to themselves, we're absolutely right that this is a country, because by the way, everybody in Russia, I am sure, will believe that Ukraine had a role in this. I mean, that's, you could take that as a given.
Sorry for interrupting. It's not a belief anymore. This morning, FSB officially disclosed that it has been solved. The names of these two women and the portraits are known. Known who ordered it, and it's now completely established ties to Ukrainian intelligence services, SBU, namely, and Azov, remnants of Azov Nazi battalion. And so if I would have been this woman, ugly one at that, by the way, I mean, I would be making, the plastic surgery. Not that it's going to help her. I mean, but it may improve her, facial features, for the future. Yeah. But other than that, she's probably going to be dead at some point of time, because this is not the type of the activity which is conducted within the framework of the law and proper judicial procedures and protocols, like involving Interpol or asking states to, well, she's plain simple terrorist. And obviously for Ukraine, she will be called diversionary act, the diversatory call, which it is in some sense. But the point is, you just don't go and blow up innocent girl, and get away with this. You will be found, as were found many, not all, but very many of Chechen and Arab terrorists, which have been hiding after the end of the Second Chechen War, in all kinds of places. Some of them.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, this is, as I said, it's a huge mistake. It's going to, as I said, harden determination. It's not going to divert the Russians from their course or their strategy in any way whatsoever. But it's going to, harden further the resolve that there is already there. And I would also say that, this is a very sophisticated society. Russia is a very sophisticated society. This is something else that I discovered when I was there. And as I said, I was there at the time. And people saw it. I'm talking about the Chechen events. They saw it as a sign of increasing desperation. They realized that the reason these things were happening was because they were losing in the Caucasus. People knew then that it would take a long time, because it's the nature of the landscape, the complexities of the situation there. But the Russians knew that they were ultimately winning. They knew they were going to win. And they understood very clearly that these attacks were an attempt to intimidate them and to throw them off course. And in fact, the reason it was happening was because ultimately they were a sign of despair. They were a sign of growing desperation on the part of a side that was losing. It was trying to lash out. It was hitting at what it saw was the soft underbelly of Russia by launching these kind of attacks. And it was it completely miscalculated and misjudged the mood of the country. And I think this is going to be proved to be the same here.
Yeah, I
was going to say that's the really critical point. That when you go back to number one, terrorism, I become increasingly convinced, is a term that governments use to justify breaking the law against their own civilians, because the effort of, as you correctly note, terrorism, the acts of violence like this are done by the weak, because they can't go out in a conventional military action, stand toe to toe. So when you start going for the soft targets, that is always a sign of weakness. And back to the history of terrorism, I'm going to shut my camera off because I think maybe affecting the feed. Back to the history of terrorism, you can't point to a single terrorist incident where it's really changed society in terms of giving the attacker the advantage. Look at what happened on 9/11, regardless of what views or who did it. I go with the fact that it was an Al Qaeda attack. Didn't turn out well for Al Qaeda. Go back to the assassination of the Archduke back at the start of World War One. Again, it did not decide in favor of the attacker. It always ends up working to the advantage of the government. And what we've seen here in the United States now is the terrorism label is being used against American citizens to justify lock them up doing things we used to get exercised the Soviets did to distance. But now it's okay, because as long as it's a terrorist attack, you can justify it. And I under your point about that the Russians at least have some maturity about this. They're not going to go off on a wild tangent, just swinging, trying to hit anything in sight. It's very precise, very measured, but they're also going to get the people responsible. I think it's done when all this is wrapped up. It has further alienated the Russian people, and not just the Russian leadership, but the Russian people from the West. The West is no longer someone that you can trust, someone that you can engage negotiations or dialogues. It's just the Russian people like finally come to realize we've got to go our own way.
Well, Larry is absolutely correct here. And fact is, it's really truism. It's not it's a common knowledge that terrorism in military terms is the weapon of the weak. And obviously, with again, at this stage, armed forces of Ukraine do not exist as organized force. And command and control, C2 primarily, structure has been practically demolished, not to mention the fact that they removed pretty much a significant portion of the most competent people and officer corps of the armed forces of Ukraine. And what you have those, the punitive organization like Nazi battalions which shoot. It was 3 days ago, Russian Defense Ministry and Ministry of the Foreign Affairs are on the record that about 100 of the regular territorial defense people, soldiers, you cannot even call them soldiers, they're like, throw the cannon fodder. It was a show, trial, and execution in the front of the ranks of those people. So, and again, those people in Washington or London or elsewhere who support that, they evidently probably have to feel the pinch by now, that, there's a lot of things which are beginning to see the light, and they will see the light, including, like, again, 3 days ago, again, near Artyomovsk, and the mass graves of women raped by Nazi battalions and VSU. There are many eyewitnesses. So this white book, so to speak, is being compiled as we speak. And obviously the combined West has it's actually omnipresent there, especially the military and intel advisors there. It's the same as with Daria Dugina assassination. While obviously there is an SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, which is now directly implicated. It's obvious, it's documented. But obviously, you have to understand that emotionally, Russians do not view this as the war with Ukraine anymore. There's really not war. As Alexander Hadakovsky, a very famous brigade commander from Donbass, from militia, is actually former SBU. But in 2014, he took the side of people's militia in Donbass. And since then, he was fighting heroically. He's obviously an opinionated man. But he was speaking a few days ago, Hadakovsky. And he's not only a famous military commander from militias, but he's very significant media figure in Russia, for example. And he stated that this situation is such that if we would be just standing still, doing nothing, not attacking or anything, we would still be winning. Because basically the whole system right now is in the process of the decomposition. And Doug McGregor yesterday, I think, he stated that, well, Russian army is back because Russian army was withdrawn for a while, and these were militias which were doing the bulk of the ground fighting. So Russian units evidently are rolling back to the front line, and that might, indicate the start of the basically drive towards Nikolaev and eventually to Odessa. But in terms of Daria, no, it's not going to affect the plan. It's not going to affect operational planning in any way. But yeah, it will be dealt with FSB, SVR, and other people of this nature who will be looking for those two ladies. I don't think so they will do anything about this young daughter of this woman. But this woman, I don't think so. She has an expiration date now, and it's not very long.
Well, indeed. And I have to say the other thing, again, talking from the perspective in London, is that just an additional point, which is now you can hear it being circulated, is that we were talking. I heard people talking about Ukraine's losses, about Zaluzhny's claim that Ukraine has only lost 9,000 men. In reality, I've heard the point made that Ukraine has lost more infantry than the British Army possesses. And of course, some people put it much higher than that. They say that the Ukraine has actually lost more men than the British armed forces in total possess. And we are confronted in Britain with a scale of Russian military operations in terms of artillery use and armored warfare, and missiles, which is simply unimaginable to the British mind. I mean, they did not believe that war could be fought in this way. They didn't imagine this kind of industrial war was conducted like this any longer. So I think you're both referring to Professor Sommerfeld of Yale University, who's been going around telling everybody. He's appeared quite a lot here, by the way. We've seen quite a lot of him here. He wrote a piece in the Daily Telegraph as well about how the Russian economy is about to implode, all because 1,000 Western companies have pulled out of Russia, which is what it basically is. And he says that the Russians are cherry picking statistics as he cherry picks his own statistics. He doesn't actually cherry pick statistics. Right. It's all completely anecdotal, what he's saying. And it's anecdotal in a very odd way, actually. If you actually do look at the methodology of his study, I mean, it's got more holes in it than a Swiss cheese. But anyway, the point is that it's very interesting that here in Britain, they're not believing him. Because, of course, we are in a real economic crisis, much more profound than the one you're experiencing in the United States. I mean, we're in a massive sense now that, living standards are plunging, that the whole economic system is grinding down here in Britain. I think that in America, people don't understand how bad the situation in parts of Europe, and certainly in Britain, has become. And the result is when somebody like Professor Sommerfeld tells us that the situation in Russia is even worse, well, this is the problem of propaganda, because I'm sorry, with all respect to the good professor, what he is saying is ultimately a kind of propaganda. Once people see through it, credibility goes away. It collapses. There comes a point when people start to become cynical about anything that they're told. And even in the Financial Times, which is very, very pro, the war, anti-Putin, anti-Russia, basically, you have articles now starting to appear. I discussed one recently by a much more sensible professor, Professor Helen Thompson of Cambridge University, basically saying, we have to do this deal. We have to understand that there's limits to what we can do to defend Ukraine, because our economic problems are so bad And this economic war of attrition that we've waged is turning out so hideously wrong. And the Financial Times did an editorial in which they said, well, the Russian economy is staggering, but it's still there. It's keeping together. Of course, it's doing better than just staggering, but they can't admit that it's, basically holding up pretty well, but they accept it's still there. It's not going to be a quick win on the economic war. We have to brace for the fact that, we're in severe trouble. And of course, people are now that they know this Kherson counteroffensive isn't going to happen, because they don't listen to Andrei or Larry. They're starting to say, you can start to see the first telltale signs that they're starting to say, we've got to find a way out. There's even been an article today in The Guardian, by the way, which is by somebody who says that, making essentially the point that Andrei made, even if the war stops where it's reached, Russia will have won, and accepting that some kind of negotiations now are inevitable and necessary. Irrespective of what happens in Ukraine itself now, in military terms, the mood in Europe is that the war is lost.
Yeah. But, I have never seen anything like what we're going through now. So I was at the Central Intelligence Agency as an analyst in Central America, but my focus was on what was taking place in Nicaragua with Soviet assistance. And I also did a brief stint on the Afghan task force, working with the CIA operation to supply the Mujahideen against Soviet troops. Even when we were in a de facto war with the Soviets, there was still in the senior policy positions in Washington, D.C., and within general public, a recognition that we needed to talk to the Russians, that we could not treat them like they were lepers infected also with monkeypox and AIDS, that we had to, lock them away and ignore them, pretend they didn't exist. And that's where we are now. I mean, it's crazy. Particularly given Russia's critical role economically vis-a-vis the West, both the supply of agricultural goods, supply of oil and gas, supply of other critical minerals. I mean, it's completely insane. And yet you have these people, whether it's Jake Sullivan or Susan Rice or Anthony Blinken, they are pursuing this aggressive isolate, and it's not even isolation of Russia. I mean, the only thing I can draw a parallel with is the Germans' desire to exterminate the Jews. That's about it during World War II.
Well, adding, which I agree with Larry, and adding to your statement, Alexander, is the fact that today, the second most powerful person in Russia, Mr. Patrushev, who is the secretary of the Security Council of Russia, states, he comes out, and when Patrushev speaks, people better listen to what he says, because Putin is a nice one, actually. Patrushev, not so much. What he says, and it's reported by every single media outlet in Russia, and he says, well, Europe is pretty much done, but wait for United States because it's about to default on its foreign debt. And when it's one thing when SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, a few days ago, through a statement of Colonel General Matveyev, who also makes statements that in accordance to SVR sources and information, the combined West already written off Ukraine pretty much. And then you have Patrushev, who just goes out today and doubles down on that. And it's neither Patrushev nor SVR. You don't hear very much from SVR, do you? But suddenly, after like those years, like you have this Matveyev guy, who is a very senior, person in SVR, and he makes this statement on the record to all major Russian outlets, and then you have Patrushev today. So it gives you pretty much the idea what is going on. And again, it's just when Larry says correctly, when you look at people like Susan Rice, Jake Sullivan, or Mr. Blinken, it finally dawned on Russians, which I was actually writing for the last 8-9 years. Those people are simply incompetent. Remove even their malice, remove many of them, they have personal accounts to settle with Russia. But they are simply incompetent. Even Russians admit now, hey, during Cold War 1.0, as Larry also stated, there was always this understanding on the both sides that, hey, you know what, we better start talking. And although President Reagan was made a kind of butt of jokes, and not only in the Soviet Union, but in the United States too, he did understand that in the end, you need to talk and you need to do something about the, for example, nuclear arms race. Although I would say that one of the major driving factors behind it is kind of obscured in the West, and this was connected to the Russian military development, which was advancing by leaps and bounds, But still, there was enough common sense to do something like this. Right now, you have totally incompetent people who, as General Latif of DARPA, 20 years, the PhD in physics. He stated in his book, and I quote, most of what American public and politicians know about war is taken from the entertainment industry. And that's the quote. The idea that Mr. Blinken or Jake Sullivan have any clue how the modern combined arms operations are conducted is risible. The fact is, I am now on the record, and I know it's not going to sit well with many. I'm beginning to doubt that very many people in Pentagon understand how the modern war is fought. Of course, there are some, especially middle level, those colonels, brigadier generals who understand what is going on. But when you look at Mr. Austin, Milley, I think so. Milley understands that. He might be a woke, chief of, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But he's certainly a militarily educated man. I think so. He understands. I don't think so. Austin understands that. I think so. Many people in the political and operational planning departments in Pentagon grasp what is going on the ground, because they see also this issue of the net centricity employed. And when we speak about the basically losses, again, there was a number which was circulating about months ago of 191,000 killed. Now we have people from the front lines, level of the brigade commanders and their own sources in Donbass, especially militias, that they talk about, obviously, the fact that Ukraine is covering it up. But we're looking at, as they say, 200,000 KIAs killed and missing in action, and 300,000 irrevocable sanitary losses, which are people who are wounded, but they are not returnable. You cannot return them to their front line because they either lose limbs or completely damaged mentally. And when you look, as Larry yesterday also posted number of the videos, basically when you are under the fire impact of something like TOS 1, or Sunburn, I don't think so you're going to survive. It's, or if you survive, I don't think so you're capable. You're not going to be normal man after that. And it's visually very indicative.
Yeah. I'm just going to take two quick observations. Firstly, you talk about these Russian officials coming out and speaking on the record. What a contrast. And I have to ask Larry this. Do you remember this ever happening before? We have these officials in Washington who are always now briefing anonymously. So we have in the Pentagon, the senior Pentagon official or senior Department of Defense official. Who is this person? We have the White House, the senior White House official. Why are these people not being named? Why are we not told who these are? Why are the journalists who attend these briefings where they meet these people not telling us who these people are? I have to say, I find that deeply un-American in terms of the America I used to know, which was, everything was, very much out in the open.
Right.
I mean, and I find it also straightforwardly very, very sinister, because it means that these people can say things which are completely untrue and which they know are completely untrue. And because they're saying it behind this wall of anonymity, nobody is going to be able to hold them to account for it in a public way. And I find that
Yeah.
very disturbing at multiple levels. And I just don't remember it being done on this scale in any previous administration. That's one thing I did want to ask Larry, whether you've actually had any recollection of this. And on the second point I just wanted to make, which goes back to what Larry and Andrei have been saying, which is it's absolutely blindingly obvious that we did not understand Russia very well. I mean, probably we've been listening to people like Professor Sommerfeld far too much, because, I mean, instead of the Russians being dependent on us economically, which is what we assumed, it's turned out that to a critical extent, it's we who are dependent economically on them, which is why in Europe we are in this crisis. And it's not just gas, it's not just oil, it's not just coal, it's a whole range of things. It's food, it's neon gas, it's rare earths, it's titanium, it's aluminium. I mean, it's full spectrum domination by the Russians of commodities markets.
Yeah, my God, how can Russia last another day if they don't have access to a Big Mac, they don't have access to Prada and to Google? I mean, without those, life is over. There was an American, I forget the comedian's name, but he stood up right after the sanctions were imposed, and he started ticking off all of the fast food joints and all these other things that were no longer going to be available to Russia. And he goes, my God, Russia's kicking our ass and we don't even know it, because we're going to make Americans the fat diabetic ones, not the Russians. So that perception is exactly spot on, Alexander. The American people, by and large, they live in this mythical world where, oh my God, Russia is ultimately dependent. There's nothing that Russia can do without us. And Americans say are a lie. People don't travel outside the United States. The vast majority don't speak a second language unless they happen to be an immigrant of sort. And so they're really, they barely know who the politicians are in their own state, much less who national figures are, and God help you with international figures. So with respect to the information operations, is what I'll describe it. When I was at CIA, I learned very quickly that when there was agreement within the policy community about an issue, there were no leaks, because everybody sort of at CIA and Department of Defense and State Department and Treasury, they'd all come together. Yeah, that's a policy we're going to support, and you wouldn't get leaks. The leaks happened when there were disputes over particular policies, and then at that point they would go to a journalist. And back then you had, Seymour Hersh, was probably the giant among them, that would write up. He was from the side. It would also oftentimes be very embarrassing to the government. So you would get anonymity at that time for those particular sources. But otherwise, you were getting, as you correctly noted, the name of the official coming out and speaking candidly and frankly. Boy, you're not getting that now. You are getting a daily briefing, I guess, at the Department of Defense, but it's risible. It is just the guy. The reporters try to hold him accountable, and he just ignores the facts and goes off in a different direction. So I have never seen anything like it, and it's part of that is because the media itself has become a captive audience of the government and of corporations. They have no incentive for the truth. Well, they now are cheerleaders.
But I would also add, which Larry, absolutely correct. The leaks and the things happen when you have this, controversy within the circle, on the policy issues. And yeah, but there is another thing, which many people, I think so, miss. I don't know how large of a factor, what is the percentage of the influence in all this affair, but anonymity also, apart from the fact which was admitted by none other than Pentagon itself, who stated, oh, will I just, throw Russians off balance? Yeah, sure, Russians are so stupid, they don't have SVR or FSB, they don't have GRU. So yeah, but the point is, what is shaping right now in terms of the collection of the war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine by Kiev regime, including, by the way, which is assassination, which is terrorism of innocent, girl, basically, it is shaping to such monstrous proportions right now. And the white book of the crimes, not just of the Kiev regime, by its curators, people who were directly involved in the command and control, training, instruction, and things of this nature, that inevitably the responsibility of the combined West and particular people, be them from MI6, be them from Pentagon, be them those advisors, those people who, taught those enhanced interrogation techniques, or people who said, yeah, just go torture Russian, POWs and kill them, it's all known. And then suddenly, when what people do not understand, but they sense, especially against the obvious economic, let alone military. Militarily, United States never was what it was stated to be, but it was exaggerated grossly then. But now it's just totally a whole other matter, because basically United States cannot fight the war, as Mr. Mearsheimer thinks that United States can fight the war in Europe. United States simply has no forces to do so and to deploy them there and to do anything. And then when you get this combination of factors, and knowing that the tribunal of war crimes tribunals and crimes against humanity tribunals will be held in Donetsk and Donbass area and in Moscow, inevitably the West, so to speak, will be exposed. And when it's one thing when you talk about, oh yeah, those special services, they kill this and that, and when you talk about, okay, in this particular, village, you had the Tochka U missile, blown, you had 35 people killed, 100 people maimed, and there was a specific officer who ordered that, and there were specific orders, and there were specific instructions. And when you get to this chain of command, which often leads to Washington, D.C., London, and now you have today Zakharova talking about, she is spokesperson for Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. She is on the record today. She talks about that EU countries are directly involved in the terrorist activities and preparation of the terrorists. So suddenly, those things, they do not have statute of limitations. And it's enough for a strong side, mind you. Yugoslavia couldn't do that, or Serbia, too weak. Neither could Iraq or whatever. When Russia says, you are implicated and you have charges leveled at you, so that changes the game completely. This is totally different story. And that's why also I think it plays partially a role in this desire now to stay anonymous, apart from the traditional BS of selling narrative and basically, providing the absolute garbage, in terms of the, manipulation of the public opinion in the West.
Yeah, I found it really curious or sort of interesting that someone on the Russian side was referencing Israeli secret operations to go after the culprits, those responsible for the Munich attack.
Yeah.
in 1972, implying that now Russia, hey, if it's good for Israel, it's good for Russia.
Well, yeah, that's what it is. And again, if somebody, and I'm not talking about Ukrainian part, I'm talking about, let's say, Europeans or Americans who were directly responsible and directly implicated in there. So suddenly there's they might not want to travel too extensively, let's put it this way.
Yeah. Well,
Alexander,
You're muted. So if there's also just apologies for that. If there's also war crimes tribunals, if Russia sets up war crimes tribunals, this is, by the way, something I was asked about recently. But because the Russians do seem to be working now towards that direction, Well, we now have a whole body of war crimes law, which says that states can bring war crimes charges against people outside their own territories. And if this now starts to result in charges, indictments being brought against people in the West, that is going to be a very, very new thing. Obviously, they'll laugh it off. They'll say that they're not going to be intimidated by it. But I think some people will be made nervous by it in the West. And if they are worried, for example, that if they go to a third country, there's a risk that they might face an extradition request. That's not something in the West we've ever had done to us. It's what we do to others.
right.
Just as sanctions are not something we've ever had done to us. Economic war, the kind of economic war that we are in at the moment, is not something we experienced before or ever quite believed it would happen. But of course, it is now happening. So I think that if we get into that kind of scenario, then it is going to have an effect. It's going to unnerve an awful lot of people. And of course, if other countries join in, if China joins it, then of course the event, when they've already, the Chinese, unlike the Russians, have been going about sanctioning individuals in the West already on a certain scale. But if they were to join in, and they got influence in many countries, then as I said, the whole thing has a potential to gain critical mass and to become, shall we say, extremely uncomfortable. And as I said, it's not something we're used to. It's not something we've ever really experienced before. And I think it will come as a shock.
Well, we've been the ones who have been, let's call it the givers, not the receivers on this. If you think back to the capture of Carlos the Jackal in Sudan, that was initially a CIA operation. They just grabbed him, didn't have a warrant or anything, grabbed him, called the French up. French came down, picked him up, took him up, and boom, he's back in jail. Well, when this war started in Ukraine on February 24th, the betting in Washington, D.C. and in London and in Brussels was, we're going to isolate Russia. Russia's going to be by itself. Well, guess what? Russia is anything but isolated now, and its the list of countries that are aligning with Russia is growing, not shrinking. Why is that important? Because when U.S. officials who were involved with this travel to any of those other countries, they're fair game now that they can be snatched through an intelligence operation. You don't need a warrant. You don't need to go through a judicial procedure. Some of that is just, it's paint put on a piece of brush to make it look better. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to just, get our hands on that person. Right now, there are several CIA officials who were in Rome involved with the illegal kidnapping of a Muslim, and it blew up on them later. So now they are threatened with arrest if they go back. So the old saying of what's good for the goose is for the gander. Guess what? The United States has gotten away with being this belligerent on this front in the past. Now it's going to potentially face the same kind of threat that we've unleashed upon others.
Yes. It's a terrible thing, in my opinion, can I just say, because I don't think we should ever have gone down this route at all. but we have done. We started it just as we started sanctions wars, and we're now facing the consequences. I was reading, the National Interest, big journal in the United States, and they were talking about how there's this economic pressure that that now is on the West, and people complaining about the way in which the Russians weaponized energy flows. Except, and this is an interesting admission, wasn't the Russians who first weaponized energy flows. It was the West that did it. It was the West that decided that it was going to block Russian oil and Russian gas and Russian coal and all of these things. And now, of course, they're now starting to complain that, the Russians turn on and off Nord Stream 1 as they please. The Germans say, well, let's talk to the Russians about turning on Nord Stream 2 for a short time. So, we can fill up our tanks. I mean, do they think the other side is stupid? Why would the Russians agree to something like that? Well, I know.
They do. It's the whole thing. When you look at the behavior of Scholz or this dude, Harbeck, whatever, his economic minister, the Baerbock disappeared for a while now because she's so stupid and dumb that even Germans begin to understand that they better not parade her anywhere. But if you look at Olaf Scholz or Harbeck and the way, you know what? Look at the photo of Harbeck being in Qatar, where he's bent almost, half bent, shaking one of the emirs of Qatar hand while emir speaks on the cell phone with somebody else. I mean, this is humiliating. I mean, for crying out loud. They literally just, and guess what? In Arab world, there are many satisfied people nowadays because they know that they have issues with the West. I'm not going to go into what is correct, what is not. But that's the same as with John Mearsheimer writing this article and again trying to portray and describe those contingencies under which United States can get involved and change the outcome. He still lives in this, la-la land that he doesn't understand what modern war is with their peer, in fact, is over better peer power like Russia. He still thinks that you can, transport 400,000 troops, combat troops, which the United States doesn't have. And as my friend Vladimir Trukhan, the colonel of the central apparatus of ministry of Russian Federation, Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, and I quote says, "We don't even sweat about European NATO. It's like it's a joke, And the question is that now he still thinks that United States can go, in. How will he collect this force? What it's going to be armed with? When it cannot sustain 2 weeks of this." Colonel Larry Wilkerson is on the record speaking to a number of the outlets, and he is the former chief of staff of late General Colin Powell. When he was asked a couple of months ago if to imagine that United States and NATO gather appropriate force and start fighting, conventionally, Russian army, which will come now in full force. They said, what will be casualties in the first week? He said, first week, probably 40,000. And they're like, they just dropped, I have actually this video in my blog too, and people do not even understand. Mearsheimer writes this: United States is nuclearly biased nation. United States used the nuclear bombs on Japan. There were intentions to use it elsewhere. And the reason that it is always was the case and remains the case, look at the latest nuclear posture review, is because the United States actually now finds itself where Russia was in 1990s. It's the completely reverse tables. The United States cannot find conventional war on the ground against Russia in Eastern Europe and win. It actually will sustain catastrophic defeat. And in order to fight this war, if it's possible, even to prolong this war, many people do not recognize that this is not the United States of 1941 and the United States of the Great Deal and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which was given this incredible chance by World War II to basically, rise economically tremendously, and become for Western allies the arsenal of democracy, as they call it. This is different country, as Larry correctly stated, and some dudes from Wall Street Journal say, oh, we have this other company, which is accounting and consulting company leaving Russia. Wow, Russia is now going to go bankrupt. No, Russians are happy. It's a bunch of freeloaders which were making a living there by actually collecting the economic data, which was used later against Russia, and they were providing, as they call, services, crucial services. There are many good Russian accountants. In fact, Russian economic education is really good. They don't, so it's like, what do they even try to accomplish here? And we have to look at this balance of power and how it dramatically shifted in the last 10 years. But many people still don't want to look at it. And when, in conclusion of my rant here, that when we say that, this is the first time in Russia is already drawing red lines, leveling charges. You level charges when you are powerful, and primarily economically and militarily. And Russia is in a position right now, not to speak of, never in the modern history of Russia will you find overwhelming feel of condescension and contempt towards the combined West. It is unbelievable. Overwhelming majority of Russians look at the West today as degenerate, as poor, and this is unbelievable turn of events. I never thought I would see that in my life.
No. I think that is absolutely true. I think one of the major changes that's going to come out of this is that I've often said this. One of the things, the one big thing that Russia has been missing over the last, more than 30 years, longer than that, is confidence, belief in itself. It has felt always, often without proper reason and good cause, that it's somehow, less good in some way than the West. And now we've had everything thrown at them and they just keep coming on. And that I think that is going to completely change Russian self-perceptions. And it's certainly going to change Russian perceptions about the West. Can I just add something else, which is now we've been getting more articles. There's that article in the National Interest that I was talking about. There was this article in The Guardian, which is talking about this all leading now to a major geopolitical change, which is, of course, something that the Russians are also talking about. Putin's been talking about it. Shoigu has also been talking about it. That now we're going to start to see global realignments. It's this thing that you mentioned, Larry, that more and more countries have been. They weren't sure quite what to make of this crisis when it started, but with almost every week that passes, you see that their mood is shifting. So that Turkey now is doing much more concrete deals with the Russians than it had previously done. I mean, we have a meeting between Putin and Erdogan, and all kinds of economic deals are done. We have a Putin meeting between Erdogan and Zelensky, and there's nothing anymore. We see countries like India ramping up their buying of Russian oil. We see the South Africans telling Blinken, get lost, get lost. We are seeing a major geopolitical realignment. Now, I don't know how well understood this is in the United States. I think in Britain it is, by the way. I mean, we still have a very effective diplomatic service. That I will say about us. We have people in every place. We are familiar. We talk to people. And I think this is causing a great deal of dismay here in London. Is this something that's understood in Washington? That isn't just China and Russia coming together. It's something even bigger than that.
No, not a clue. It's like taking someone who's used to driving the car. The United States, in the aftermath of World War II, was basically driving the world car. Now we've been put into the child seat in the back that has a fake steering wheel. And we continue to think that we're actually driving the car, but the other forces are moving it, and we haven't caught up to it. It's not that we're going to have a new world order. We have a new world order. We just haven't, it hasn't caught up to us yet, where we have been confronted with the harsh realities that we can no longer dictate. I mean, and I think I mentioned this before, something as simple as cutting Russia off from SWIFT effectively blinded the intelligence community in the United States, at the NSA, at CIA, because in the past, we could monitor, when I say we, I mean the United States, not me personally, we could monitor the movement of financial transactions, even within the, if you will, the black markets, because if it was being transferred from bank to bank with a SWIFT message, you could pick it up and intercept it. These knuckleheads said, okay, we're going to lock them out. And now they've created an alternative, which guess what? We don't have access to. So right away, we've gone from a picture of where you could see the world financially to now where you can only see a portion of the world financially. And those resources and demands are now outside of a chain of supply that the United States cannot control. It is, the fate is not, it's not, as Andrei is pointing out, it's not 1941, 42, where we were an industrial monster that was awakened and we had the factories, we had the shipyards, we had the steel mills, we had the textile plants, we had everything that actually Russia has. We had it in and could turn it on, and boy, it started humming away. Well, guess what? This crisis has now forced the Russian economy in the same way that World War II forced the United States economy to step up. It's forcing the Russian economy to step up, and it actually has the capability to do so because it has the resources, it has the infrastructure, and it has, most importantly, educated population that can handle it.
And adding to Mr. Patrushev and to what Larry stated, which is absolutely correct. I mean, and the fact is, when talking today to media, he also stated this obvious fact that when we're talking about the default of the foreign debt by the United States, he said, well, they already stole $330 billion of our money. They will steal the rest of it, from many people, many countries which are there, which is, of course, a pinprick a little bit of, towards China, which, when compared against the background of India, was relatively slow in the de-dollarizing. When you compare what India did like a week or two ago, when Indians just told Russia, okay, just cut the crap, let's completely de-dollarize, let's do the full trade in rupees and rubles. This was India's initiative. It was shocking, that even they say, what, let's do that now without any further ado, without any further preconditions and everything. Just let's do it. It's obviously compared to China. And do not forget, I believe it was 50-fold? I believe it is 50-fold, the increase of India buying the Russian 50-fold. It wasn't that large, but now it's huge. And it's not only resources, and Russians and Indians and Russians are on record. And Indians confirmed that, the next recipient of S-500 complexes most likely will be India. And China suddenly begins to, and especially after this couple of PR disasters, and let's face it, relatively significant PR victories for the United States with the Pelosi and congressional delegation visiting Taiwan. And now with Japanese parliament visiting Taiwan like yesterday, I believe, So it's, there's interesting dynamics within these BRICS countries. But as Alexander correctly stated, the way the foreign minister of South Africa was basically teaching Blinken was delightful. So it's a delightful sight. I mean, it's and the funniest thing is those people don't even understand that they are the butt of the jokes, And before I conclude here is, if you may, I read the question by some people on the the ticker line here is, what about how dangerous Elon Musk is for Russia? Is Russia defended against him properly? Let me give some explanation to this. Elon Musk is a joke, and in Russia he is viewed as nothing more than media hungry dude. He is not even a real engineer. Actually, he has engineering management degree or something like that. And when people say that, well, people don't understand that Musk is public figure primarily. And what he does is it's primarily by NASA former or present NASA engineers and personnel, which have been provided for him, through. And no, Russia is not in any danger from Elon Musk, and Musk would love to have access to Russia's space technologies if he could. So, but yeah, he's a very good PR manager. He's like, this iPhone type thing, so. And yeah, it's he has his cult and following. Hey, people who want to work with signaling, let them waste their money on Tesla and see what. Well, in the United States, you can use it. The United States is relatively resources rich. I do not expect much in terms of disruption of the electricity, with the exception of California. But in Europe, obviously, it's a whole other story. So this is.
Well, actually, if you look at what's going on in the United States right now with the Colorado River,
Oh yeah,
Lake Powell levels that people are going to be not only having to reduce their water usage, but it's going to it's directly translate to power usage. So,
yeah. Southwest is screwed. Let me put it this way. Yeah.
Go figure. People move to a desert and they're surprised there's no water there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I can remember that the US, which had capacities to organize, to do things. I mean, I when I was at school, I remember the moon programs and how all the various things were brought together and how they were done, and it was hugely impressive. You might have wondered about the wisdom of it in financial terms, but it was enormously impressive and very, very, very exciting. And now the United States seems to have lost that skill. It seems to have lost that gift, and it's something which I wonder whether it can rediscover it. But I will say this: it won't rediscover it if it continues in its present course, its present foreign policy course. Because I'm going to say this: I think what it is doing is it's draining intellectual energy away, which is squandering intellectual energy, and it is causing massive imbalances in the economy, as the United States has tried to use its economy in order to draw countries to itself, in the process sacrificing that mighty industrial machine which you were talking about, Larry. And I think that this is something that the United States needs to stop doing, think about itself, think about its own needs. And I wonder whether it can pull it together again. I think it probably can. There will be a challenge, but sometimes meeting a challenge like that can be exciting in itself. It can make a country feel better about itself if it's starting to deal with its real problems, as opposed to its fictional ones. Now, I was reading, every so often the Kremlin comes up with talk about conference, and they did a conference on shipbuilding, not perhaps the most exciting subject, but you could see people coming together. It's a big conference. Putin chaired it, talking about how to restructure and rebuild the shipbuilding industry. And where does that happen in the West anymore?
Yeah. Well, can you find a city or neighborhood in Russia where it's a no-go zone for police, where drug traffickers have taken over, where 80% of the children in those neighborhoods are illiterate, cannot read, cannot do basic math, or they do enough math that they can make change for $20 bills when they're selling narcotics on the street corner. That, unfortunately, is commonplace in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, San Francisco. Let's go down the list of these major cities that were once shining examples of sort of American ingenuity. And we have, in the United States, we've become accustomed to allowing entire populations of Black children to grow up as wild savages. There's no other way to describe it. The school systems do not serve them. Their communities are not safe. The ones who actually have parents that try to protect them find them, oftentimes their own children are getting killed. And so, and meanwhile, go back and look at what Russia was in 1999. I have an American friend who has lived in Russia over those 23 years. And he said, Russia was a shithole in 1999. It was awful. But what the Russian leaders did was, instead of spending money on wars in Iraq and wars in Afghanistan and wars in Somalia and wars in Serbia, they took the money that was in Russia and invested it in infrastructure, in subways, in railroad stations, in airports, and in improving the communities. And as my friend said, he says, man, life is great right now in Russia. And it shows the difference of where the priorities were in terms of the government leadership, where they're going to spend the money. And I admire your optimism, Alexander, that America may be able to turn around. And I think it's potential, but it's going to have to. It will probably take place in the midst of a crisis. Because the kinds of changes that have to take place threaten the endemic corruption that has just become the feeding ground, the pig trough that is Washington, D.C. And that's a very tough thing to break.
I have to say, the first time I went to Russia was in 1998, in the immediate aftermath of the crisis there. And I have to say this as well. It was in a terrible mess, a very terrible mess. But it was also very impressive in a strange way, impressive in ways that I had not expected. And it was the moment when I also began to realize that an awful lot of what I had learned or thought I knew about Russia, and I studied Russian history at university, was simply wrong. But anyway, so I mean, there was that you could see that latent strength that was there, which was underneath the really awful times that people were living in. And having seen that revival, that's partly what gives me optimism. Or, I'm not going to pretend there isn't an element of wishful thinking perhaps too, but it is what gives you the optimism about the United States, that maybe there is that latent strength there as well that could be brought to fruition. And by the way, I think the same about Britain. In spite of our many problems, if we organized ourselves intelligently, we could actually, I think, do quite well in our own way, but not when we are messing in Ukraine. And I have to say, this is what is making me particularly angry, is the extent to which our government, the British government, has made Ukraine its personal cause and has got this obsession about Russia, which goes even way beyond anything even the US does. And we're getting ourselves drawn into all kinds of things in Ukraine, which are not really relevant to us.
Alexander, Andrei, Larry, I don't want to bring something uncomfortable, but I think we have to perhaps amend a little bit of the words said a little while ago.
Okay.
Which word?
Just just for you, Larry, the savages word. I'm a little uncomfortable with it.
Yeah,
I don't know. I just want to give you the opportunity to I really apologize. And
no, that's fine.
It's made me a little bit uncomfortable.
No, I can understand. Yeah. It was not referring to them as the racial angle. It is literally how the government is treating them.
Okay.
Because when you look at how these children are and we're not just talking black children, because I personally, I've worked directly with a group up in Baltimore. It's an area called Pigtown, which is basically half white, half black, half white. And I was actually the director of security at a summer camp, and we had an 11-year-old boy come down. He was white, but we were warned that he was more sexually experienced than any of the adults because his mother had used him as a prostitute on the street. And, and this kid, I mean, and I could tell some other stories with respect to these children. Now, so when I use savage in that sense, it's literally you're putting children that are supposed to be cared for and protected into an environment where they are treated like wild animals. And in fact, they're treated in even wild animals care for their young. Wild animals will try to protect their babies. And yet what we're seeing here in America is we're not protecting these children at all. And so it is, to me, it's one of the great horrors of America that it continues to go on and on, because these children didn't choose to be born in that situation. And yet they suffer consequences of it. And I'm not talking about the fact that, yes, grow up and engage in criminal activity. It is dehumanizing to them as persons. So, yeah, if anybody think that I was trying to make some, unsubtle racial crack, that's not what.
No, I just want to. That's why I just want to make sure we clear it up. I just want to make sure that you, Larry, can clear up the context of what you're saying. That it was not a racial in a racial way that you were saying it. Because I myself, I was a little taken aback.
Well, no, that's fine.
Yeah. And I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable.
Oh no, you don't.
In the chat. I just want to make sure that this is cleared up and that this is not taken out of context.
You're perfect on. We perhaps have to find a new word for it, because even, like I said, to draw the analogy to say like wild animals, well, actually they aren't, because the wild animals care for the young. This is a situation where the society creates situations for these children which are almost insurmountable, and that, I mean, it sickens me.
Okay, let's leave it there and get back to geopolitics.
Yes,
that's been cleared up. Okay.
I have one question. Has anybody else been surprised? 3 days ago, Ministry of Defense in Russia announced that they had killed a number of Ukrainian troops, and they mentioned specifically they'd killed 20 U.S. mercenaries. Now, I have never seen them put that many numbers in one day, and there has been zero reaction to it in the United States. And it's just like, okay, just check the box.
Yeah, that's check the box attitude now, because and they cannot basically convey or get across the realities of that war to American public in general. Partially, Americans have their own problems to take care of right now, and there are plenty of those, despite the upbeat reports that American economy actually grows, which it does not. But the point is that, there are many, so to speak, people who are very misguided or are very mistrained and have misconception about real war, including the so-called combat veterans. They shoot at, mujahideen in Afghanistan, and then suddenly you have to endure constant fire impact, and that brings you to the level of PTSD and shakiness, which you never experienced before if you survive. So yeah, it's a reality, of course, is not basically complementary to the narrative. Guys, I have to say though that I really nearing the time when I have to leave. So if you let me go, I would really appreciate this. So, and I really have to go, guys. So, Larry, pleasure talking to you.
Good to see you, my friend.
As always. Vera wants you. Alexander, pleasure talking to you and having you around, guys. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later. Okay.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Andrei. Bye-bye. You guys want to go for another 10 minutes?
Yeah, let's.
Is that time,
I
Larry?
wouldn't
10 more
mind
minutes?
actually. I wouldn't mind because we don't always have a chance to speak to Larry. So now that we've got him here, and to be honest, Larry, I mean, you're the person who's worked inside the machine in Washington. What do you think they're saying to each other at the moment? I mean, do you think that there is a discussion going on? Because that's the other thing that I got, by the way, completely muddled up about the latest American arms deliveries to Ukraine. I thought they were an escalation because I got my Grey Eagles drones mixed up with my Scan Eagles drones. And I didn't realize that these are actually very small drones, which are used for reconnaissance. They're not the big drones that I thought. And 16 of these little handheld drones, it just seems almost derisory. Do you think there's a debate now going on in Washington about this? Are there some people who are saying, well, look, this has gone as far as it can go. We are now at that point where this is turning into something more and more costly for us. It's going horribly wrong. Let's try and find some off ramp somewhere. Do you think that debate is happening?
Yes, to an extent. People need to understand, your viewers need to understand that Washington, like other countries, is in the throes of bureaucracy. You cannot underestimate the power. And when I'm talking about bureaucracy, that each one of these agencies or organizations, whether we're talking CIA or we're talking Department of Defense, or you're talking the U.S. Army or the U.S. Marine Corps, every one of them is a hierarchical structure with people in command, and ultimately get to the top where there is somebody in charge. And to survive in those organizations, basically, if you don't want to be excluded or relegated to some terrible job, then you need to conform with the people that are above you, or at least serve their interests. And what has been, to me, really shocking is how corrupted the entire system has become. Because early on in February and into March and even into April, I know for a fact that within the Defense Intelligence Agency, that the briefings to the senior commanders were that, yeah, we think Russia's going to run out of their missiles and rockets any day. I mean, I can understand a newspaper being used as a tool to put out that kind of propaganda, but you're supposed to, you're behind the curtain now. You're supposed to be able to actually tell the truth, and they weren't. So now there is now the dawning recognition that among some that Ukraine can't sustain this. Yet there is still in positions of leadership in all of these agencies, people who believe that actually Ukraine can ultimately pull this out. And it's, they are people without experience in military affairs. They don't understand the very simple act of how are you going to get a group of soldiers together in a formation to be able to move across open ground without being decimated with the combination of artillery fire, airplanes attacking them, rotary wing aircraft attacking, etc. It's just it's crazy, and they continue to send some of the weapon systems. You didn't get it wrong, because I know that they're the Army air missile that they're talking about, the Atacams, whatever it's called. They're talking about sending that, and the HIMARS, and they keep getting blown up. In fact, I was told specifically by someone who knew. He says, we think that only about 20% of it's getting through. And so, at some point, if you're in Las Vegas and you keep doubling down and losing money, at some point you run out of money. And here in the United States, actually, we're the ones likely to run out of the weapons first. That'll be the moment of people wake up and go, what happened?
Are you aware of this article that a lot of people got very excited about? And I got pretty excited about. I mean, I was very impressed by this person who calls himself Marinus, in the US Marine Corps magazine. Now, I have to say, I personally found it extremely impressive. I mean, I'm not able to assess all its nuances, and there may be lots of things I don't agree with. But intellectually, it seemed to me actually very strong. And I have to say this, I don't think any European military, except possibly the French, about which I know nothing, any European military, including the British military, which I say with regret, you would have articles like that published in their own journals at this time. So does that suggest that the people in, the uniformed military in the United States who perhaps are pushing back, they're saying this isn't working, this military campaign isn't going in the way that, the political leaders, the people in Washington, the people in the White House want to make us think it is? Is that a reflection of a debate? And did you think that the person who wrote that might be a serving officer?
I don't think they're a serving officer. I think it's one of the old school guys. I've heard some speculation about who it might be.
Yeah.
But what you highlight, think about what you're saying. We get one article which raises a contrary voice in something that's considered a respected publication, and boy, that attracts attention. Whereas it highlights the fact that there's been such a lemming effect with everybody else, that going along claiming that Ukraine's winning and Russia's losing and Russia's isolated and the United States is prevailing, and then this one person pops up and says, wait a second, what we're seeing is actually something pretty remarkable. So that tells me that at least at the editorial level within the Marine Corps and that journal, they are now saying we've got to start getting the reality out there. We can no longer afford this delusional fantasy that has been allowed to go along unchallenged. And you still, unfortunately, and again, I'm not live to put me on air, but you rarely see, Scott Ritter doesn't show up on any of the major television cable shows or regular news. Doug McGregor shows up occasionally on Fox News with Tucker Carlson, and once in a while maybe with Sean Hannity. But again, he's about as rare as sighting a unicorn. There really is no expectation in the media to present an alternative viewpoint, and that's what's dangerous, because it convinces the people of a lie, and then when they wake up and find out they were lied to, all of a sudden they get angry, which is, I think, what you were pointing out earlier in one of your observations about what's taking place in the UK.
Oh, absolutely. Well, can I just say, I mean, in Vietnam, at the time of the Vietnam War, towards the end of it, there was this concept of the credibility gap. If you go back to the literature of that time, the late 60s, early 70s, people were talking about it. The fact that, they'd been told lots of things by the US government which hadn't happened, or the opposite had happened. And the result was that mistrust began to sort of crystallize. Right. And the point was reached when nobody any longer believed anything that the US government was saying. But at that time, and I remember, I was very young, but I remember that time, it was specifically about Vietnam. The credibility gap that existed then only applied to Vietnam.
Right.
Partly because we did have that diversity in the media that we don't have today. Maybe 80% of the media, would take one particular line, but there would always be, in every respected journal, you'd have the op-ed by someone or other that would give the contrary view. Now we don't have that anymore. It's, to all intents and purposes, that has vanished. I mean, the Washington Post, to me, reads like Pravda in its worst days. I mean, it really does. It's very depressing to see what it's become. So if we have a credibility gap this time, it's not going to be like the one we had in the 60s and early 70s. It's going to be systemic. It's going to be, dare I say, like it was in Moscow circa 1973, when people were convinced that they were not being told the truth about everything, and that is very dangerous indeed. And I don't think we've ever been there in the West, but of course, if Ukraine is the catalyst that makes that happen, well, go on.
Well, I was just say, notice the difference. Back then in the 60s, you had CBS, ABC, NBC correspondents, war correspondents, along with New York Times, Washington Post, the AP, UPI, a variety of journalists, credible journalists that were actually allowed to be out with the troops reporting on it. What we're dealing with today is, you do it, and I know Alex does it as well, that we have to sort of comb through the internet, the bowels of the internet, looking for different pieces of things that are not being widely reported. You rarely see the embedded reporters up front with these units telling what's happening. And that really made a difference in turning the American public against the war in Vietnam, because at least they were reporting accurately what was going on the ground. Despite the government said, oh yeah, we got Lyndon Johnson and then Nixon, oh yeah, we got this under control. And then you get the Tet Offensive in January of '68, which just, where did that come from? We thought they were defeated. And you had the reporters there showing the battle, showing the conflict. I can tell you that if you had other reporters up on the front lines with these Ukrainian troops actually filming the hell that they are experiencing, this war would be over. Because the people in America and in Europe I don't think would not want to put up with. We cannot allow this kind of slaughter to go on. So
I completely agree with that. Actually, I mean, I have to say I've seen film from the battlefronts, and by the way, I should say that the Russians do have that kind of reporter that you're talking about. People who still go out there on the battlefields, and many of them, by the way, are very critical. They make all kinds of comments about, this military operation is not being conducted properly. The political leadership in Moscow isn't doing things as it ought to be. They tend to support the war, but they're not, robotic voices. And some of them are very brave. But I've seen pictures of this war, which have been extremely distressing.
Yes.
I mean, very, very distressing. And that's an understatement. And I'm far from seeing the worst, because, of course, what I'm seeing is film principally from the side that's winning. Right. I mean, you're not getting Russian soldiers exposed to these massive artillery barrages that you see the Ukrainians going through. But here again, I have, being of a certain age, I have memories. I remember people in Britain, people I used to know in the 60s, in the 70s still, who'd experienced artillery barrages in both world wars, and who still had the extraordinary traumas and physical, but also nervous, mental traumas that come with all of that. And I mean, even Zelensky said it was hell. I mean, it's hellish, and it must be utterly hellish. And I'm absolutely with you. I think if people in the West knew what was happening there, they would be insisting, simply for that reason, that this war had to be brought to an end.
Well, in fact, you just saw the CBS 60 Minutes report that came out on the diversion of Western weapons. And while the reporter was, he was sort of a pro-Ukrainian kind of guy, he inadvertently was telling the truth. And you saw that there was not an organized logistics system. They were relying upon this, let's call it it was like the Underground Railroad running weapons to the front to escape all of the corruption nets. And once people started reacting to that, boy, CBS pulled the plug on it right away. And so that's the dilemma that we're sort of in, that people don't understand that one of the cornerstones of having strong democracies is having a strong independent press, both for electronic and written media. It must be independent and must be able to speak with a voice that's not subject to the control of some corporation or government entity, because it can ultimately help save these governments from themselves. But that's not what you got going on now.
Well, that's exactly what the US used to excel in. That's why the protection of the media is there in, I think, is it the First Amendment of the Constitution? It's clearly set out there, and it was set out there because the people who wrote the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights, who were extremely intelligent people, as I always say, who certainly knew what they were doing, understood that you cannot function. This system that they were trying to set up could not function without an informed public. Now we had that in Britain too, by the way. I mean, we had an excellent media at the level of the big broadsheet newspapers and our terrestrial television. I'm not suggesting it was perfect, but it did keep you very well informed. It's nothing like what you see today, and it's gone. And I wonder why. I wonder what happened to make it go.
Yeah, well, the consolidation within corporations of the media has made where the financial bottom line becomes more important. It's the money that dictates. It's not whether or not you can actually. Well, sorry, my dog's caught something. But the way it is transpired with the corporations controlling it, you now got people looking over your shoulders telling you what stories you can do and what stories you cannot do. So,
I mean, and the astonishing thing is that the media puts up, that the journalists put up with it. They've just put up with it. They like it.
Well,
that's what I simply don't understand. I don't understand this. I mean, they want to be like this.
They're desperate to hold on to their jobs. One of the things that has taken place over the last 25 years, you used to have people would go to journalism school, and they'd come out and they could go to radio stations, they could go to magazines, they could go to papers. They had a wide variety of options. A graduate, not of the University of Missouri School of Journalism, but from the University of Missouri, and they had me back about 6 years ago to do some speeches. And one of those involved speaking with the journalism school. And basically, what they were telling me, the focus of that school now is on producing people who knew how to do spin. Yeah. That was it. Not doing reporting, not investigative journalism, basically learning how to lie to people to convince them of something that is not true. That was what the focus of the teaching was on. I was like, "You're kidding!" No, that was. That's where because that's where the money is.
It's terribly sad. I mean, it's awful to see this happen, and as you absolutely rightly said, without an informed public, a democracy cannot happen. An educated public, because in the United States, by the way, was a major pioneer in mass education in the 19th century. Because again, it was very well understood that it had to be an educated country in order to be able to function. America was far better educated at that time than Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, the reality is, like what you guys do, in a way, you're sort of the pioneers now, because you've created an international community. It's not just people from one country that are watching you, and it's creating an international dialogue. Cole, this is genuinely the silver lining, because it does provide another avenue for people to be informed and to be educated. And frankly, I think it frustrates the hell out of the established media, because they can't control you. You're like that drop of water that just keeps flowing downhill. They can't stop it and dam it up, and it ultimately gets through. So that's what gives me some hope, that the whole the array of the internet still is not under their complete control, and they cannot control this. And as you've had to find the workarounds. You've had to go to Odyssey, and you've had to go to Rumble. You no longer could rely upon YouTube, but YouTube's going to discover that capitalism's a beautiful thing, and when you start attacking your audience, they'll go elsewhere. And then all of a sudden, just that's really what's happening now. The parallel with Russia, because as the West tries to clamp down on Russia, it's like Facebook saying, "Okay, you can no longer post on Facebook." Russia goes out and sets up its alternative, and then all of a sudden, Facebook. Well, wait a second, we're going to have to create bots to fabricate numbers like we're really doing something, whereas you folks get actual living, breathing human beings who will reach into their pockets and donate to sustain you. Yeah, that is a beautiful thing.
Well, we all try, Larry. So do you, if I may say. You run a wonderful blog, which everybody should go to who really wants to understand, especially what's going on in Washington and what's going on in Ukraine and around the world. And as I said, we all try. And thank you for those very, very kind words. Alex, I think is this a good moment, perhaps?
It's a good spot to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think.
What do you guys say? Should we wrap it up?
What do you go? What do you say? Unless you have, anything else?
I have no further words of wisdom. And again, I apologize for having said anything that have upset people.
No, I think everybody was understood completely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's I do deeply appreciate what you guys do, and
as we appreciate what you do, Larry. And
we hang together. Or we'll hang separately.
Absolutely. Where can people hang out with you, Larry? Where can people find you?
I'm at sonar21.com.
All right, sonar21.com. I will put a link for that down below in the description box. I will also put it as a pinned comment. We will wrap it up there. Thank you to Larry Johnson, the great Larry Johnson. Thank you to the great Andrei Martyanov. And thank you to everyone that joined us from Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube chat, and the Duran.locals.com. Thank you to everybody who was watching us from these platforms. Thank you to our moderators. Valies was in the house, Zariel in the house, Alice in Blunderland in the house. Reckless Abandon was also moderating, and I think that is everybody that was moderating. Thank you very much to all of those who moderated, to everyone that sent us questions, as is kind of becoming a tradition in a way. Me and Alexander, we will get to all those questions. Anything that was addressed to Larry and Andrei, we will also pass it off to them.
Happy to answer anything.
Yeah, they'll be able to answer it in their own way, whether it's in blog format or video format. We will end the video there. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys.